When we first meet Howard Bunny Colvin in Season 2 of The Wire, he is a man who is growing close to the point of breaking after witnessing the senseless killing of a kid during a gun battle. At this point in his career, he is the quintessential middle manager who has grown frustrated with constantly having to follow orders that never accomplish anything or have any positive impact on the community, which causes him to question his own role in this cycle. Though it is the only scene he appears in during this whole season, it gives us an idea that after over 3 decades of playing the game, he has had enough. Early in Season 3, there's a scene in which Colvin is questioning 2 new officers about their sense of direction. At first glance, it seems this is to introduce us to Bunny as a hard-nosed by-the-book supervisor, which he is, but there's a bit more to it if we dig a bit deeper. First and foremost, it's very telling that Bunny is talking about directions. At his core, Colvin is a mentor and a coach. Of course, by telling the 2 new officers to know the actual directions of where they are and where they are going has a practical purpose in their job, it also shows that he's the kind of person that always knows where he is and where he wants to go as a person. Thomas Houck, aka Herc, tells the 2 officers that this is a speech that Colvin has been giving to all new officers for years, which tells us that he really believes in it and knows that it works, but the catch is, it's up to the new officers and us the viewers to figure out what he's really trying to say. This is a theme we see consistently with Colvin throughout Seasons 3 and 4. Bunny acts like a compass for many of the people he interacts with, especially those he knows has the potential, but just need a little bit of a push in the right direction. Case in point, it is his mentorship of Carver that helps Ellis change from a hot-headed detective to a capable professional who becomes a bit of a mentor himself. He also notices Naaman's true character before anyone else and helps mold him from an angry corner kid to a productive young man. Most people want to feel like they've made an impact on the world, or at least their community, especially those who go into a field like law enforcement. No one goes into a profession like that wanting to just be a pawn in a game they didn't want to play in the first place, but oftentimes this is what happens. As I said before, by Season 3, Colvin has had enough. He spent decades trying to make an impact, but at the end of the day, he is powerless. He is just another pawn forced to do the bidding of his boss, so the higher-ups can maintain their level of status and comfort. After a leadership meeting in which one of the other supervisors is relieved of his command, several other district commanders begin juking their stats to make it look like they are achieving a lower felony rate. However, Bunny sees through the charade and refuses to follow suit. He also shows frustration with his own subordinates and their failure to see what the bigger picture is, especially when Herc and Carver arrest juvenile offenders and spend their time arresting low-level criminals and not doing what he considers real police work. Colvin openly admits that his district has actually seen a 2% increase in the felony rate, and Burrell threatens Colvin to also relieve him of his duties if he doesn't fix things in a hurry. This, of course, leads to the creation of Hamsterdam. He decides to take things into his own hands and sets up free zones where drugs are allowed to be sold with no opposition from his police officers. The areas are uninhabited places away from the general public. He commands his subordinates to just make sure that no violence breaks out. When telling his officers about his idea for Hamsterdam, Colvin states, "Middle management means that you got just enough responsibility to listen when people talk, but not so much you can't tell anybody to go fuck themselves." Colvin was in a no-win situation, the same as most middle managers. The middle manager is the person who is told they need to get things done, but also how, where, and when by people who have no idea how the job is supposed to get done in the first place. Colvin was from a time when, as he said, a cop walked a beat and knew his community, meaning they were up on things. They knew who to talk to when something happened, or if they were lucky, before something happened. That way, they were in a better position to do something about it. In the present day, they simply responded to things after they happened and were told they needed to do something about it with no resources or support. It was easy for the bosses like Burrell and Rawls to sit behind a desk and say stats needed to change and then expect it to happen just because they said it should. This is why they both look shocked when Colvin flat out asked them if a murder is committed, how do you make a body disappear? Meaning, everything they were being told to do was from a reactive standpoint, so it wasn't going to make a difference or impact on the stats in the first place. But what's interesting is, Royce, Rawls, Burrell, and the others had issues with Colvin legalizing drugs, but in reality, he was just juking the stats in a different way. Rawls and Royce had no issues with juking stats when it suited them or when it was politically expedient. The problem was, Hamsterdam was something they couldn't use to their advantage. As Hamsterdam begins to grow, things begin to happen. Colvin is able to dedicate his resources to actual police work, and the felony rate drops significantly due to this. Communities begin to take more responsibility for their own neighborhoods, and citizens begin attending community meetings. Needle exchanges and other services that were otherwise left unused started to become taken advantage of by the people now using the free zones. Ultimately, after reporting a 14% decrease in felonies, which was virtually unheard of, Colvin is forced to explain how he made it happen. This creates a firestorm within the city's management and police leadership. Now, was Colvin right for doing what he did? While you could make the moral argument that he was, legally, no, he wasn't in the right, but a fed-up man with nothing to lose is a man who is going to make things happen. The world of The Wire is filled with gray areas of morality, and it's never as clear as black and white. No one batted an eye when a prosecutor gave Omar a get-out-of-jail-free card for a low-level felony, but no one criticized her for legalizing whatever felony he committed. The point is, Colvin's biggest problem was he tried to make a difference without permission. If you're in middle management, you probably can relate to feeling this way. Oftentimes you get bosses and superiors that want things to happen, but they have no idea how it's going to get done. They just know that they need you to make sure it does get done. They offer you little to no support, but the blame is on you when it doesn't happen. You're also in a position where you have just enough power to tell people what to do, but not enough resources to support them, so you're more than likely going to be dealing with frustrated subordinates as well. This is why so many people get stuck in middle management and are never able to move up either. When they fail to meet impossible expectations, they get passed over for someone less competent, but is better at playing the game than they are. Another one of Colvin's issues was that he thought he could pull off what he did with no repercussions. His response to anyone who questioned his plan was always the same, that it was temporary. But it is never clear if that is what the real plan was, or if he was just saying that to justify his idea. Colvin either didn't realize or forgot that in a situation where a pawn traps a higher piece, the higher piece has more moves to be able to strike back at the pawn, and this is unfortunately what happens to him. Not only does he not get to walk away with his pension, but he is demoted and loses out on a lucrative job at Johns Hopkins as well. This is why you always need to weigh the cost of what you do as a middle manager. It's incredibly important to remember your job is just a job, and that's it. I often tell people that even if you spend your entire life dedicating yourself to your career, the second you leave, they'll have your job posted up before you even walk out the door. The difference you can make doesn't have to be in your job, and that's ultimately what Colvin finds out. Had he realized this earlier, he could have left unscathed and had more options going forward. In Season 4, Colvin is working security, and when an older client assaults a young woman, he again finds out that doing the right thing or wanting to do the right thing means very little to the people around him, and with no support he's left powerless. This leads him to take on the grant project and start working with other corner kids in their special program. What is fascinating is that Colvin runs into almost the same issues from the school administration that he did as a cop. The school is clearly failing in every way. The students are way behind, the resources are non-existent, and the morale of the teachers is in the gutter. Though Colvin and Dr. David Parenti come in with an idea and a grant that can help at least a few students, the administration balks at the idea, worried that the program will make the school system look bad. In scene after scene, it's clear that this program is needed. The kids in the program are unruly and exhibit a lack of social skills, signs of mental illness, and sometimes violent behavior. The school administration, however, worries that the program is just a waste of time as it isn't educating the kids and is focusing on less important things like socialization. Of course, none of the administrators are the ones having to deal with any of those kids in the classroom, and none of them are students trying to learn in that classroom either. Despite knowing the backgrounds these kids come from, the administrators still wonder if the kids are being left behind and are more concerned with the image of the school system, i.e. the public's perception of them as administrators. A perfect example of this is when a small group of the kids show a breakthrough and work together as a team and are rewarded with a fancy dinner at Ruth Chris for finishing their project first. After the dinner, Miss Shepardson, the assistant superintendent, is more concerned that the students embarrass the school administration instead of recognizing the kids' achievement. Because she doesn't understand that being able to go to a restaurant and act appropriately is a huge milestone for these kids, she is still convinced the students need to prepare for the state exam. However, in a brief moment of fiery truth, Parenti, the sociology professor, remarks that the students weren't being properly educated in the first place, so forcing them to study for a test is a waste of time. Soon after, during another class session, a fight breaks out between Zenobia and Chandra, which results in Miss Mason getting knocked down. This happened to be the first time that both Principal Mr. Withers and Miss Shepardson have viewed the program, and they are appalled with what they saw. However, in a follow-up meeting, all but Miss Mason expressed that the program is positive and having an impact. Despite the program dealing with these setbacks, it continues on until word is received that the program will be shut down due to the school administration not wanting to make waves with the new Carcetti administration because it will draw too much attention to the school. Though some of the kids are happy they will be returning to their normal classes, Others are not. This is a clear indication that the program did in fact have some impact on the kids. The fact that all of the students were against being in the program in the beginning, but now some wanted to continue in it, speaks volumes, especially because two of the students who wanted to continue in the program were Naaman and Zenobia. Both of them were very vocal about their opposition to being in the program at the beginning, but then appeared dejected when it came to an end. Even Albert, upon returning to his class, makes a sarcastic comment, but then immediately apologizes for interrupting when he doesn't receive the reaction he thinks he will. This action, though insignificant in the bigger scheme of things, is another example that the program did in fact have a positive effect because it showed the kids did develop some level of social competence. As a person who has over 13 years in nonprofit program management, this was really frustrating for me to watch unfold because this is a perfect example of things I've had to go through time and time again, even with bosses that understood the work I was doing. Programs that aim to affect change are extremely hard to measure, and unless there is a clear metric on what is deemed success or failure, it will be impossible to quantify or qualify the results in any way. This is why, as a program manager or a project manager, your first priority needs to be to determine what it is you're trying to accomplish. In the special school program, it isn't really clear what the specific goal of the program is. Good studies start with a good question. You start broad and you break it down. What was the question this study asked? It isn't overly clear other than the goal is to find ways to solve some of the issues in the school system before jail becomes the end result. When you start with a good question, you can then build your program more appropriately. It's easier to determine what you want to accomplish, how you will accomplish it, and when you can begin to measure your findings. If you don't start with the right question, you're shooting in the dark, and unfortunately, it seems like this is what the special education program did. Good programs are also measured in numbers and statistics, but they are also measured in stories. One of the biggest areas the program administrators failed was they didn't document any success stories. People, especially donors, love stories, even more than statistics. Imagine if Colvin was able to properly articulate how at the beginning of the class Zenobia and Naaman were loud, disruptive, and prone to outbursts, but towards the end they were able to work together on a team and build a model through solid communication and teamwork. Just think about the impact that would have had on someone wondering about the program. You want buy-in from City Hall? Have your stats ready and a whole lot of feel-good stories. Another way the program team failed was their lack of communication with the school administration. In a pilot program, it's especially important to always tell the client administrators what is going on all the time, especially of any snags or hiccups. They should know what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what you're doing when an issue occurs, and finally how you're adapting the program over time. This could have prevented a lot of issues going forward, and had the administration been kept in the loop from the beginning, they would have known what the teachers were going through. If they had the success stories, they would have seen the impact being made sooner, which could have convinced them to fight harder to keep the program. Now, it doesn't always work out that way, but in any sort of pilot program, especially one that uses grant money or public funding, you need allies. When you're working on any sort of program or project, it's important to understand that anything you do that will affect change is going to receive significant criticism. In the book Leadership on the Line, there is a quote that sums this up. It goes, "Frequently people who seek to exercise leadership are amazed their organizations and communities resist. To persuade people to give up the love they know for a love they've never experienced means convincing them to take a leap of faith in themselves and life. Even if it isn't a life or death change, the mere thought of things being potentially uncomfortable breeds resistance." On the flip side, the book also reminds us that you stay alive in the practice of leadership by reducing the extent to which you become the target of people's frustrations. As it was, Bunny managed to both become the target of his boss's frustrations due to his work with Amsterdam and also cause the school administration to go far outside their comfort zone as well. In the end, by making himself a target that forced people to confront some uncomfortable truths, he didn't last long once he began to stir the pot. Now this might be a bit of a stretch here, but in some ways, Colvin was the equivalent to Bodie on the law side. As Bodie told McNulty, he'd been doing what he had been doing for years. Never screwed up. Always did what he was told. But in the end, no one had his back, even when there was hell to pay. You can almost hear Colvin sitting on that same park bench saying, "I've been out here since I was in my 20s. Never skimmed off the top of a bust. Always followed the rules. Always tried to help out my community. But what comes back? You think if I get jammed up, they'll be like, 'Yo, Bunny was a great cop for over 30 years. Here's his union rep. Here's his lawyer.' They want me to stand with them, right? Well, where the fuck they at when they're supposed to be standing by us? When shit goes bad and there's hell to pay, where are they at? This game is rigged. In the end, both men were just pawns that tried to impact the game like a queen, but they didn't have the support or the power to do it. Both characters tried to do what they could with what they were dealt, and fortunately for Colvin, he found a little bit of peace in being able to help Namond, and that's the ultimate lesson from Bunny Colvin. No matter what you do, even if you're a community activist, a non-profit programmer, or even just an employee at work who wants to see things operate more effectively, at the end of the day, you probably won't have the power to make the big changes you want to see. So instead, you have to find your fulfillment in the little things you can control. Hopefully something small can eventually turn into something big. That's why today so many people in middle management turn to mentoring, volunteering, and philanthropy. It's why many corporations are starting to now really support employee and corporate volunteerism. Colvin didn't have to save the entire city of Baltimore and every student in the system, but he was able to save one. Maybe that's all he really needed or wanted. Maybe the same rings true for you. When I worked in a big organization, we always referred to upper management as the ones in the ivory tower. You know, the ones that made decisions but never had to live with them. Unfortunately, that's just work, and life in general. Remember, your work is just what you do to live. It isn't your life. Your happiness more than likely is not going to come from your job. That's why I always tell people find a job you like well enough to stay at, but you don't have to love every minute of it. It doesn't even have to be your passion. When your passion becomes your work, it most likely isn't going to stay your passion because when it does, it isn't done to make you happy, it's done to make someone else happy. If you can find that perfect job that is your passion, Godspeed. But for the most of us, that isn't the case. Whatever your situation is, if you're trying to make a difference, the first thing is to have a plan and consider all the consequences of what will happen and who will be affected before you jump in. We all want to make a difference, but if you really want to make an impact, start small. As The Wire shows us, the game is always going to stay the same, but with the right tools, the right attitude, and the right approach, you can make a difference to a few of the players, just like Bunny Colvin.